Paul Rushforth from the UK and TJ Redding from New Zealand, along with Stephen Hughes from Brisbane, Australia, join Wilderness Conversations to discuss their incredibly interesting but extraordinarily ambitious proposal to set up an international school. They've called it Heritage International School. More details can be found at the website, which is www.HIS, which stands for Heritage International School. So it's hisonlineschool.org, hisonlineschool.org, where there is an enormous amount of information. I encourage you to go and check it out. Welcome, TJ, Paul and Stephen, to Wilderness Conversations. We've got an exciting thing to talk about today, which is the Heritage International School. But before we get into that, let's just do a bit of a round table and I'll get you to introduce yourself. I'd love to hear a little bit about where you came to faith. Did you grow up in a Christadelphian family? And where you are now in terms of ecclesias. So I might go to you first, Paul.
Good morning, Stephen. Nice to see you. So I was brought up in a Christadelphian family in England, in Bristol, and I was baptised when I was 18, and have grown in commitment to my faith, I would say, through the course of my life, from kind of 18 when you're only just an adult, through to finding Esther, my wife, and having our two boys. And then we're in that stage of life where we've got grandchildren now. I'm the recording brother of a very small ecclesiastical in Tornton, which is in the southwest of England, it's a beautiful ecclesia because there's only a few of us. There's probably 15 or so active members, but we've got a wider membership of about 45. That's based mostly on Persian immigrants who come across here illegally, one would have to say, mostly, and joined Christadelphian Church after a long period of teaching. And so we're, like on Sunday, we have lots of baptisms of those Persian people, and we convert almost everything we do into Farsi, which has become quite an interesting move and a change in the way that we do things. So that is me in a nutshell. I ought to say I've been a head teacher and a leader in education almost all of my life as well. And I retired a few years ago.
And in what area?
So I started off in primary, but I've taught secondary maths. I was head of a middle deemed secondary school. And then in the end, for the last 5 years of my career, because in England, if a school does well, it takes into its charge schools that aren't doing so well. And so we ended up with 10 schools and 10 principals. And that was an interesting and challenging part of school, my professional life, because they would come into the organization imbued with a sense of failure. Because things hadn't gone well, and also resentful, with the resentful staff, and turning the culture of their school around to a more positive one was quite a challenge. But we did it, and I enjoyed it whilst it lasted.
Well, certainly we'll come back on that. TJ, what about yourself?
Yeah, I was raised in a Christadelphian family. You probably can tell from the accent that it's a bit mongrel. I grew up in Massachusetts and went to the Worcester Ecclesia, was baptized just before I turned 15. Then studied education, got a job working at the Heritage School in Sydney and taught some interesting children there. And had a lovely time there for a long time, and then moved to New Zealand. So I'm now in New Zealand in the Hamilton Ecclesia, still in education. So I've taught primary trained in high school history predominantly. I've taught woodworking. So I've taught pretty much everything from start to finish at some point or other.
And Steve, you've been on Wilderness Conversations before, but just let us know who you are.
Yeah, okay. So I was brought up in a Christadelphian home and was baptized, in fact, just after I turned 15. And I was in a small ecclesia Ardingly in the Central Fellowship in the UK. Now, my father was from Sydney, so I'm half Australian, as well as being half English. Started out in the medical physics world in St Thomas's Hospital in London and the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery, on various different, mostly cancer treatment, but other things as well. Then ended up coming into the university sector in Australia. I met Jane and ended up getting married at the end of the year. Lived in England for about 3 years, and the deal was, I thought, if you get a bit homesick, we'll try and move over to Australia. And so I had a colleague who came out here as an academic, told me about a job in Queensland, and I applied for it and got it, and moved out here in 97. Our eldest boy, Daniel, was just 18 months old. We're initially members of the Wilston Ecclesia. I'm sure you know well, or at least Steve will know. And then a kind of startup ecclesia, Moreton Bay, and then another startup ecclesia. And it sounds a bit like innovation, but in a sense, I suppose it is the North Brisbane ecclesia about a year before COVID. So I'm currently the secretary or recording brother of the North Brisbane ecclesia, and with 4 adult children, 1 girl, Laura, still at home, and 3 grandchildren, 1 in Adelaide, South Australia, and two up here.
And what involvement have you had with education?
Okay, yeah. Well, so I've been in the university sector for 97, sort of easing it out now, sort of on a casual basis. But I've taught initially, it was like the medical physics subjects, and then I got into astrophysics. Did that for 20 odd years, and now I'm just teaching sort of basic physics to international students, predominantly Chinese, as you might imagine. Australia, most of them are Chinese, but some from the Middle East and other Asian countries, and a few from South America. They're trying to build up the student number from that. So that's my background, sort of easing into retirement.
Great. Well, you're a disparate group of brethren, but you've all managed to find each other and come together for this extraordinary idea of an international school. So how did you meet, and how did this idea come about?
I rang Paul.
Yeah.
So I came up with this idea, probably 2 years ago, and then had an initial steering committee that was composed of mostly Australian brethren who I knew through connections with the heritage in my time there. And then I reached out to Paul, who I had met because his son moved out to New Zealand, and happened to catch him at a time where he was actually newly retired and probably looking for something to keep him out of his wife's hair. And so from there, we then got a hold of some others, and then who were on the board. And then Stephen, I think you reached out to us and said that you had heard about.
Yeah, I read about you in the Christadelphian magazine. Well, I think initially I saw a survey, and I thought it definitely is something I would be interested in getting involved in. In view of my background in, especially I'm into hands-on things. So if I tell the student, field of physics, I've got I have all sorts of toys and demos I use. So I thought, okay, I think this is something I should try and get involved with. Then I sat on it for a bit, not being a fast mover. And then I think I read an article in the Was it Glad Tidings, maybe? Oh, I think it's you, TJ, I think, have written it. Have you written one?
Yeah, so there was one in the Tidings and one in the Lampstand, and then I think Paul wrote one for the Christadelphian.
Then I reached out to you, I think. I think. Yes, I did, because I heard about you 2 years ago. We were over for my daughter-in-law's wedding over in Auckland, and because during COVID we had this international Bible class, and I was always on the lookout for speakers in other countries, and someone recommended you at the time. I think it got lost in the emails or something. I can't remember. I was talking to Ron. I'm blank. Ron. Yeah. Ron. Yeah, he was at the at the wedding with and one of my best friends here is Dave Saul, who's Ron Hoban's brother-in-law. Yeah, so I did know about you, and then so I think I got your number off someone. I think might have been Sam Haley, I think. I know. Yeah. Anyway, I found you somehow.
Well, I certainly know what a school is, and I think most people do, but I certainly don't know what an international school is. So how does that work, and what's the concept?
So online schooling is the fastest growing education sector, and schools all over the world, online schools are burgeoning. There's at least 700 in the United States of purely online schools. And certainly in the UK, developing really quickly. And just when you reflect upon the history of schools, it's only been about since the late 1700s that we've gathered children together in order to educate them. Now we've got the facility through computers to be able to educate children in their homes. Now, how does that actually work? Since what you want from a school is not just a body of knowledge to be conveyed from teacher to child, but crucially, you need their attitudes their attitudes, their principles, their developing understanding of the world. All of those things have to be conveyed at school as well. And we kid ourselves as adults that we do most of that. In truth, it is the culture of the school. It's the people in the school, your friends, who develop your attitudes. Now, it is possible, though it needs to be intentional, to do that online. So in terms of conveying of the knowledge, which you do need, even in this world where you can AI almost every piece of information and it'll present it for you neatly. In order to pass exams, and we need our children to pass exams, they need a body of knowledge. That's pretty straightforward. And it's really much more efficient if you are looking at somebody as we are now, in this situation, than it is in a normal school where somebody needs to sharpen their pencil. Shane is being a nuisance. Jemima's having a hissy fit, and the teacher's spending a lot of time on discipline and behaviour. And then you've got a cue for everything. And then someone's mean about your hairdo or your fashion sense. So online education allows you to have a really clear and in the right circumstances, uninterrupted conveyance, shall we say, transition of knowledge from one to the other. This school, however, is going to be as focused on developing those attitudes and those principles, and how to communicate effectively and how to work with others online, which is going to be the way for the future, as it is on that knowledge. And so it's very intentionally about developing spiritual individuals based on Christadelphian biblical principles, and also, again, very intentionally developing a group of people who will grow up together across the world.
You've already said that sort of teaching the stuff, the information is not really the issue. The issue is the social involvement and the learning that happens with interaction. And so whilst Jemima having a hissy fit is a bit annoying, and someone arguing about your dress sense is a bit annoying. But it is actually part of growing up. So how do we, with this idea, how do you make up what we're lacking when we're online, as opposed to interacting on a daily basis with a group of other kids and teachers and so on?
Yeah. So you are, just as we're interacting now, you are interacting. And of course, you'll know that you can go to breakout groups, you can work in pairs, you can work in teams. But if you're working in a group, you have to be taught how to do that, how to ensure that somebody doesn't dominate that conversation. And so you'd give those children particular roles and you'd teach them how to act. So today, I don't know, today you're the person who explains difficult words. Or today you are the captain of this group and you've got to make sure that everybody is able to contribute and that everybody does contribute. There's nobody on the sidelines. So you're doing lots of those kind of activities where you're learning to work together. And you could do that when the teacher's present, but of course you can also do that when the teacher's not present. And you can then send your recording back to your teacher to show that you managed to pick up those attributes and you worked effectively together to produce something. So you don't need to be physically together. No one's pretending that's absolutely ideal, but given the situation we're in, that's got to be better than home education in itself, where there's a potential for children to be somewhat isolated, and parents have to work really hard to ensure that that isn't the case.
I think one of the things that we've also considered in that regard is we have a lot of facilities already established in across the world. We have our ecclesial halls. There are schools of various descriptions in far-reaching places, and to actually use them as hubs to bring people together. So if we have a pocket of students who are in a geographically close area, to liaise with those local ecclesias and open up their halls. And we see that as also a tremendous preaching opportunity. So if we have people who are not associated with the Christadelphians, who are come to the school, we can direct them to, the Riverwood Hall, for example.
I'm trying to imagine who the target audience is here. So is the target audience a family who are considering homeschooling but may not feel like they've got the resources to educate in that way? Is it people that live in isolation? What's the target audience?
It's all of those people, all of those groups, plus anybody who wants to be part of a faith school. That is a growing number of people. According to the Department for Education in England, for instance, 250,000 children aren't in formal education in England, which is a stunningly large number when you think of how the empty places in schools as a result. And for one reason or another, many parents decide to keep their children away from school, which I think, as an educator who's run schools, I think that's a crying shame, because children do need each other. That's where they do most of their learning, and sponsoring that interaction for children has got to be helpful. Going back to your question, it's open to Christadelphian families, families who appreciate a Bible-based, spiritually informed education. And as it grows, and as there's more capacity, and we get the trust of the ecclesias worldwide, who are prepared then to start sponsoring other children, then we'll be able to open up to the large community of Christadelphian children in Africa, Turkey, the rest of the world. And then it switches from a school for the developed world into a preaching opportunity beyond that. That is that's somewhat a distant future, but we can see that happening.
You did mention time zone.
Yeah, I wish I hadn't, of course, because that's a challenge. But that's really just a question of ensuring that you have some teachers in different parts of the world to make it work. But just as we're meeting here, it's a bit early in the morning for me, and it's probably a bit later in the afternoon for you. It is possible. And what we would envisage is to have one part of the day where the whole school comes together. And that's, in England, we call that, and it's still a legal requirement in England, interestingly, and that would be our act of worship. And however we take this forwards, it's really crucial that what we do has a spiritual component. But that might be the only fixed point in the day. And lessons might be organised to meet the needs of where the children are. Lessons will be recorded so that if a child missed a lesson, which we don't want them to do, they can then go back to it.
Legal requirements, I suppose every country's a little bit different.
Yeah.
But we've got New Zealand, Australia and the UK represented right now. For those three countries at least, is this a viable alternative or a legal alternative for schooling?
Yeah.
So essentially what we're looking at using is a education management tool. What that does is it allows us to disseminate learning to our students wherever they are online, which most schools would use within, say, their country. The advantage that we have with this particular product is that we can actually get them to upload the curriculum of any country that we wish or need. And therefore, we can make sure that the education that we're offering is in keeping with whatever country that is. So as far as an international school, typically is accredited as an international education body. And then what curriculum they offer often are internationally recognized curriculums, like you may have heard of, like the IB, the International Baccalaureate, or Cambridge curriculum, or the American curriculum. Those are probably the big three. That's fantastic. But the challenge with that is that they are academically rigorous, and not every student has that capacity. So by using a hybrid model where we actually can provide the learning for that particular country, it means that we can offer, whether it be this higher tier that's internationally recognized across multiple countries, or we're giving them an education that is recognized within their country, we're allowing them to have those flexibilities.
Just to step in there and say, the school that we will run will have better outcomes than almost all other schools, because why wouldn't it? And if that's not our ambition, then we ought to stop right now. You know, if you entrust your children to this school, you can be absolutely certain that they will reach their potential when it comes to your local exams, because it would be betraying parents and children if we don't actually ensure that happens. So that's really important.
And there was just one other element that comes to mind, which sort of physical schools give, and that is childcare. So, you know, two parents working, this would probably be limited to children who have got a parent at home who can support them and look after them in that fashion, I would imagine.
Certainly at a primary level, that would be a requirement. When you start getting into the high school, you know, those children would be legally allowed to be at home, say, unsupervised. So, you know, yes, I mean, there's these trade-offs in that sense. You know, we can't offer, a babysitting service as a facility. But is that really the ambition of education? You know, I mean, obviously it's a great side benefit, but, you know, as an educator, you know, I didn't go into educating to be a babysitter. I went into it to inspire and transform young minds.
Well, I think it's one of the disadvantages of modern schooling, isn't it? That component gets in the way of education, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Paul sort of alluded to that already.
Just to cut in there, Steve, it is going to be possible if there's a number of parents in an ecclesia or a location,
Yeah.
they can work together so that they could bring their children, as TJ just said, actually they could bring them to the ecclesia and they could form what amounts to a school, with a person supervising. But absolutely, the teaching assistant here for us will be the parents.
You mentioned it'll start off distinctly Christadelphian. Do you see any issues with sort of the various, I mean, because Christadelphian, there's different cultures across the globe. There's, different sort of expectations and ways of doing things. Is that an issue, or do you think we can sort of hit the middle point there somewhere?
Yeah, well, just speaking personally, having come from one thing I didn't mention, I was actually baptized into a small fellowship. So I'm quite well aware of these different kind of flavors. But one thing I've learned over the years is that when you sort of look at outside Christian organizations, one thing I think is kind of astounding about our group is just how uniform the belief is. I know you may be involved in occasional disputes. That's one thing I've found. And I was talking to a brother in Adelaide, and he pointed out to me, and I think people will agree, that if you get ecclesias that are outward looking, involved in preaching work, that seems to reduce the amount of internal strife. So I think maybe if we see, this education thing, it's a kind of an outreach thing. As Paul said, ultimately, I think this could be a major preaching avenue.
We've already experienced brothers concerned about the fact that we've reached out to unamended Christadelphian ecclesias, and of course you've got hats on, hats off, different sort of clothing. The truth is, we're a school, we're not an ecclesia, and those kind of questions belong in the ecclesia. And if this is a school that's open to anybody who wants a biblical education, but when it comes to those different flavors, well, that's the ecclesia, that's not the school. But that's fair enough.
One of the words that come to my mind when I read the proposal and saw what you're doing was ambitious. So just talk me through how this kicks off. And I'm not sure where you are with your planning and so on, but I could see it sort of reaching a certain volume where it would then, take off and run very well. I could see that. But of course, the challenge is getting to that point, I imagine.
Yeah. I think there's a challenge in starting anything ambitious. I mean, you look at the heritages that are across Australia, for example, and it was an ambitious undertaking, and the community rallied around those, and they've been a tremendous blessing. Yes, there's been difficulties, as is true of any wilderness journey, but with those challenges comes tremendous, benefits. And so, I mean, the idea is really born out of the idea of bringing the concept of a heritage to anywhere in the globe, anywhere, that doesn't have a heritage. And so, I mean, the resources that we've got is obviously we have now Zoom and things like that, and we've got technology that can allow us to distribute it. So really the resources we need is we do need funding, to help. And so we've put out an appeal for that. And then the next would be to gain a number of students who are interested, and then we've had already people interested in teaching, and yet we're not really at that stage to ask, but we're getting there. But yeah, it's probably the biggest question we have is that as the snowball starts to roll and the momentum picks up, how big it can get and how quickly, because obviously we're not limited to the size of the block of land we've built on, or what country has what Christadelphians in that geographical location. And so the momentum could get quite big quite quickly. And certainly other online schools have experienced that. I think, Paul, you were talking about a school in, not a Christadelphian school, but a school online. Yeah, yeah, they've got more students trying to enroll than they can really
Minerva.
take up in time.
It's all over the internet.
Yeah.
So where are you at the moment? You've written some papers, you've written some articles, you've had some information evenings. Where are you at? Are you taking enrolments? Have you got teachers? And what are your plans for sort of kick-off?
Yeah, well, the next phase is doing a surveying to see if there's any families who are interested at this point. The issue for us, I think, is one of trust. The children are the most precious people in your life. Where you place them and in whose care is absolutely crucial. And it's our challenge is that why should anybody trust us? We're not an entity just yet. So we've got money coming in. It's not flooding in, I'd have to say. And there are two. I'd also say we're determined to start. And we're going to start in September 2026, so that's next year. That's not a lot of time, frankly. And there are two routes that we could take. One is that we start as a small but typically functioning school where we're employing teachers. The other is that we offer a range of courses that homeschoolers in particular, but others might wish to take up specifically for their child, almost as a taster, if you like.
Like a supplement to what they're doing at the moment.
Exactly. And that relieves us from the burden of actually employing people. We'll employ them for that period of time. And if, in a sense, the teacher will get paid some, then the school will take some for the facilities that it's offering the teacher in particular. That will develop trust. And so we would, start off with the prospectus of education, if we do that. But and in addition, it's really important that anybody that comes to our school has the community element and the spiritual element. Otherwise, we're no different to any other school. So even if we start off with what we've come to call the soft start, those things are going to be crucial. The community and the almost like a youth group, really. The community element and the spiritual element we will do as a school, and that will be free of cost. And we would want everybody who's part of the school to join that. The bit where we will have to charge, and of course it's difficult because if you've got a parent at home and one working, and you've got a number of children, you're the poorest you're ever going to be. So finding extra money at that point is quite a challenge. But this would allow some parents, perhaps lots of parents, to dip in and get a feel for how well this works.
What ages are we talking?
Well,
that's a good question.
Yes, it very much depends on which route we take. If we employ people, then just like all the other online schools, you really have to start at the beginning of their formal education, which is 5. I think that presents some challenges, frankly. But unless you do that, then they're going to go into another system of education, and you're not going to bring them into yours. If we go for a soft start, then actually it'll probably be across particular exam periods. So they're going to be a little bit older, or it'll be for children whose parents feel they've fallen behind in particular subject areas. So that wasn't a particularly clear answer, but it was an answer.
I was just going to chime in that a couple of the things that you had asked there, Steve. Like we've got a board of trustees established. We have, a website and Facebook to help publicize the school. I think one of the challenges that we also have is just getting the information out to people. So I mean, we're very blessed to be a part of this wilderness conversations, because this is an opportunity for more people to hear about the project. So yeah, that's one of the challenges that we face, is just people knowing that we are out there.
The theme or the motto looks like it's going to be inspiring minds, transforming lives. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Yep.
What does that mean to you?
Well, really, it's about the inspiring minds, is that curiosity and that excitement for learning that we want to tap into, and to, it's born out of Romans 12, this idea of, by the renewing of your mind. And then that idea that learning and education, and particularly our faith, should be transformational. And I think it's trying to present to whoever's going to embrace the school that two-part of education, whether you're talking about faith-based education or you're talking about secular education, is that what we learn, we then need to apply. And so what we want is a school where the learning is not compartmentalized so much to the point where, we have our faith basket, and we talk about the Bible between this moment and this moment, and then we switch to science. That what we want to encourage is that learning of faith and the hope that we share is embedded in all of those different academics, but not to just leave it as an intellectual discussion, but then to give them tasks and assessments and learning opportunities that take that into the real world, and apply it in their community, in their ecclesias, in their families. And so that's the overarching ambition of that statement.
Paul used the word trust before, and TJ, you mentioned the Board of Trustees. Could you just tell me a little bit about the Board of Trustees, what their role is, and how important having that sort of strong foundation of brothers and sisters is?
So, so they're drawn from across the world, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, and the UK. And we're always on the lookout for people who would like to join us. Don't have to be an expert in education, but it would be good to have people who perhaps have been involved in business, and people who have a strong interest in it. So what do the trustees do? They effectively determine the policy and the practice of the school. Ultimately, we will have a principal, and the Board of Trustees will hold the principal to account. And ask them essentially to what extent the school is upholding the policies that have been agreed by the principal and the trustees. That's fundamentally what they do. So we're meeting next week. We're just agreeing the welfare policy, for instance, and we're already considering, well, what do we do if a child discloses that there's a problem at home? How do we handle that in the context of the ecclesia and the authorities as well? And that will be written down in a statement. That will be available to all, but particularly to the parents, so that everybody knows and has a clear understanding how we keep the children for whom we will have a responsibility safe. So that's what they do. It's a great role, and actually we get on really well together. I think we have a good time, because we've coalesced around what we consider to be an idea that could change the future of our faith forever. You imagine one school where all of our children could go if they wanted to. It's a strong unifying force.
I can see this being really attractive to parents that are teaching kids at home and sort of wrestling with, the curriculums and so on, and particularly as the children get older and it becomes more challenging. You move from, addition to calculus, for instance. That obviously it must get more challenging. I never did it, but I can imagine it would be difficult. So I definitely see huge opportunity there. Is this in competition to the heritage colleges that already exist in places like Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide and so on, and I think even one in Canada, I believe.
No, and TJ will explain why.
No, no. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I worked for Heritage Sydney for 16 years, and I wept and bled and sweated for that place, and I'm very grateful for the time I spent there. And then having moved to New Zealand, there's nothing like that, you know. And so one of the things that we did very early on is we had a meeting with all of the Australian board chairmans, and basically floated the idea of what we wanted to achieve, and they gave their blessing. The intention is never been to be in competition with any of the heritages. And Jason Hensley, Brother Jason Hensley, who's part of the Los Angeles school, he was part of the early steering committee. So he's aware of what we're doing. We've had support from the Canadian school as well. So essentially, where does the existing heritages and us fit in together? The intention is that, as you say, with physics or calculus or whatever, one of the challenges that any school has is having enough students who want to take the course at say those senior levels. And you can't run a course with 2 kids. So our ambition, obviously, once we're established, is to be able to approach those heritages, or they approach us and say, oh, we've got 2 kids at Sydney who want to do physics, but we can't run a class. And so we'd be doing online distant education with them. And we can take those 2 and the 3 from Adelaide and so on, and the 5 in India. And, and now we've got a class. So they still keep their kids, they still have their enrollments, but now the thing that heritages can offer is they can say, hey, we can offer that course through our sister school, which is an internationally recognized school. And so regardless of what entity, we want to be a value add. We want to add things to whatever they're doing.
So can I just jump in and take a live example? The recording brethren throughout the world have had the advert for Adelaide. They're desperate for a maths teacher. And if you are a maths teacher and you're listening to this, Adelaide is a lovely place to live and a great place to have a career. But in the meantime, we as a school who would have a number of maths teachers, because we're across the globe, the children from Adelaide School will be able to draw on the outreach that we're able to offer, and they can go online and join our classes. That's a complementary service and in no way in competition. If you live in Adelaide, you're going to go, and you want a Christadelphian school, you're going to go to that school, and you should. So we're not competing.
I can see that working really well. And obviously, you've got 3 or 4 big cities in Australia, but even within those cities, there's students that just live too far away, and it's just not feasible if you're outside of the city somewhat. And then obviously you get into the country areas of Australia and then beyond. I can see a real need for this. And I can very easily see the complementary nature of what you're describing. It does make sense to me.
Definitely no competition. We in truth, we want them more on board, really. But, they are busy people struggling with their day to day.
Paul started off by telling us about some of the advantages of not being in a classroom and being on the screen and things like that. There's a lot of talk about screen time and whether screen time is good for kids and so on. Have you given any thought to that?
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, being an online school, we need to think about that correct balance. And so, given age appropriateness, what we're envisioning is that it's not, I guess, like your traditional school where from 9 to 3, they're at school. And so therefore 9 to 3, they're in front of a computer. That's not the case. What we're envisioning is that there would be a scheduled time. They would come on, they would get some explicit instruction from their teacher. They would get explanations of tasks. They may have time working with, partners and things like that and teammates. But then there's going to be all this learning that they need to go off and do. And I think that's one of the tremendous advantages of the school that we're proposing is, for me as a teacher, and the same is true for my students, we're tied to this spot on the globe from 9 to 3, where you can imagine that if you've got a child at home and they've had their discussion and they're learning, explained to them, and then they can go outside and explore the nature that has been discussed in the learning, or they could go to their local museum and then have learning that they would never be able to experience in a classroom. And so it's that kind of innovation in education that really excites me. It's the screen time is really about getting them in front of a teacher for that moment of information and learning, but it's then being able to go out into the world and consult with other experts and see the learning in the real world.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Can I just add a little bit about assessment? Really important. There are 1,000 different ways a child can demonstrate their knowledge. And just because this is online doesn't preclude them from handwriting their answers, recording their answers in a group, developing a play to show they understand what they're doing. All of the things you do in school, they can either be recorded, written down, and uploaded.
Paul, you mentioned the subject of cost before, and you talked about the context of the busy, the most expensive time of life when you've got kids and so on, which I think everyone on the call here has experienced that. Yeah, it is expensive then. So how are we going to be able to afford this?
Well, it's interesting that obviously cost is always the rub. And one of the things that, say, Australia benefits from is that the government funds the teacher's salary. Now, we don't have that luxury. But the cost that we've been discussing as a working figure currently has been £4,000, which works out to about 8,000 Australian dollars. Now, my understanding is that, for example, some of the heritages that are government funded are looking at about $6,000 per year Australian to send their kids to that school. So when you think about what we're offering, it's a competitive price, especially when we've got one arm tied behind our back, as far as we're not backed by the government. Nor do we have to then, in that sense, cater to the government's whims or decisions on how we, spend our money or regulate what we teach, because we have a whole lot more freedom. But it's a competitive price, and I would say it's fairly competitive when you consider that we don't have a uniform that you have to buy. We don't have all those other expenses that come with getting your kid to a school that are going to add to that cost of, say, $6,000. And we have the luxury of bringing education to your house. So, I mean, when you want that kind of convenience, flexibility, you're going to go overseas on holiday and you can take your teacher with you, as it were. All of that, has to be part of the trade-off of that increase in cost. And so I think, when you're talking about competitive with the existing heritages, we're looking at a figure that is dearer, admittedly, but competitive. And I think, then we get into all the other ways of trying to mitigate that cost that all of the schools work towards.
When we did some market testing, and we were looking at our school in comparison to other online schools, this is around about one of the most economical. So we're not eager to make any profit. We don't need to do that. We just need to cover our running costs. And of course, we don't have accommodation costs like normal schools. Just reflect upon the fact that our budget when I was running our 10 schools in the UK was in effect 25 million Australian dollars per year. And per child, we were getting, I suppose, 10, at least it would be about $12,000 dollars per child. So this is a relatively moderate outlay. However, if you haven't got it, then it doesn't matter how much it is, it's too much. And that's where the ecclesia can step in. That's where other brethren and sisters, people who are in the position of Stephen and I, who are grandparents, who've had our careers, who are relatively comfortable, who can say, well, do you know, I'd like my child to go to that school, and this is how I can help. So that broadens it out from just having the children as a responsibility of the parents to, as we know, the children being the responsibility of the ecclesia and the wider ecclesial family.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that Paul is framed for us that I really appreciate is this model of a village, or in our context, the ecclesia, raising children. We live in a world that's becoming more and more isolated, insular, and understandably so. But here we have an opportunity to shift that balance around and have an environment where we're all in this together, supporting. And the ecclesia, one of Paul's suggestions, which I think is brilliant, is opening up our ecclesial halls for performances. And so you have these kids who might be learning an instrument online, but they then can have an audience, and the ecclesia can support in that way. And I mean, really, the sky's the limit of the type of innovative, imaginative approaches that we can take, because we have such freedom. We're not restricted by so many of the things that geography, for example, or a location or finances or things like that do.
I know every country is different, but is there a possibility that the Australian government, in the case of Australian students, would contribute if it was set up in the way that they would appreciate or would recognise?
They might for Australian students, but they absolutely won't for others. So that does present a bit of a problem for an international school.
Yeah, so every country's different, every rule's different.
Yeah, I know some brethren and sisters in Australia are considering using the Christian college, the Australian Christian college, because you can get online education for just over $1,000, and that's because the government are funding their teachers. But just consider community and spiritual development. If you send your child to that school, they're going to be taught the Trinity, the personal devil, all of the traditional teachings. And perhaps even more important than that, they're not going to be brought up with other like-minded children from similar backgrounds. And this is about sending a message to, if the Lord remains away, a message to a time that we will not see through our children, and getting them to develop relationships with each other that are lifelong.
At the risk of really just going off scope here completely, I would love to see a Christadelphian university. And of course in the US there's a lot of private universities, more so than Australia and perhaps the UK, I'm not sure. But has that ever crossed your mind, moving beyond secondary education?
Probably not to the level of a university. I mean, you mentioned earlier, Steve, this sounds ambitious, and now we're talking, over and above. But some of the things that we have talked about is, you have like the Iranian brethren and sisters. We have, there are adults who are in need of English competency. And so again, it's one of those things that if we were being approached and it was something that we could fund and we could resource and all that, then I think absolutely we'd be willing to take on, helping anyone to get educated, and get those qualifications.
Yeah, I imagine once you've got all the systems in place, you could offer, a university per se is probably a little bit ambitious, I agree, but certainly, adult courses would certainly be feasible.
That would be easy to do.
Yeah.
The adult courses wouldn't be so difficult to do once we've got the infrastructure in place.
That's a good idea. I actually gave a talk once at a high school in Brisbane, Hendra. It's near the airport, and it was talk about university courses. And I was actually really surprised to see middle-aged people, like 30s and 40s, sitting in the classroom with year 11, 12 students. And it's because it was this scheme where people can come, if they missed out year 11 and 12, they'd actually come into the school and actually do it, like for getting into uni. So
a really exciting opportunity, and I still think it's ambitious, but fabulous. And you guys have really thought it well through. So I'm really excited, and I hope God blesses the work. For those who are interested, obviously you've got the website, which is hisonlineschool.org, all one word. What's there, and how can people find out more?
So there are plenty of buttons to press to get contacts. And do you know what? People can phone us up as well. So that won't be a problem. We're happy, and we anticipate that if you want to send your child to us, there will be a period where we need to discuss that with you to make sure that what we are offering is right for your child, and that you are convinced that this is a good opportunity for them. So there's got to be, unlike perhaps normal schools where you'd go and visit the school once, there's got to be lots of conversations, discussions, and understanding, and a real free flow of information between parents and school, so that we build up trust and we understand each other.
Well, I hope the next 12 months go well for you. It's an exciting prospect, and I think there's a real opportunity here. So it's been great talking to you, Paul, TJ and Stephen. Thank you very much for joining Wilderness Conversations.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.